Gorthuada. We are Alison and Merv Davey, ably assisted by the dancers Jowdy and Tegan, and we're here to talk to you this evening about Cornwall's distinctive form of step dance. In the Cornish language, the term for a step dancer is a lapior, and there's a lovely, if very poignant, reference to these dancers in the 18th century. It's a description of mining by William Price, and I will try and tell you the name of the book. I
can't pronounce it either.
Cornubenensis, very complicated, in Latin. The very first task which boys were given when they went to the mines, at about the age of 8 or 9 years old, was picking or washing ore. To help with the separation, the boys agitated the mixture with a heather broom, or, in the early days, with their bare feet, standing ankle deep in water all year round, using their feet. Because of this, in the 17th century, they were called lapiors, meaning dancers, because they jumped up and down in the ice-cold water. All yours.
We first see the word lapior in 11th century Cornish vocabulary. It was active vocabulary intended to teach Latin to people who spoke Cornish. So there's no English in it. It just goes straight from the Latin to the Cornish. And in the Latin, it's saltator and saltatrix, which means lapior and lapioras in Cornish, which we take to mean dancer. And there's a lovely old Italian dance called the saltarello, which obviously has the same kind of origin to it. Unfortunately, we don't see the word lapior in the Cornish language text. In the medieval mystery plays, there's lots of references to dancing and singing and so on, but we don't actually see lapior, so we don't really know the context of it, except that it existed, and obviously it was in dialect usage in the 18th century. In 1828, the Cornish antiquarian, Davis Gilbert, published a poem of place names from around here, actually, in an attempt to capture the sound of Cornish. What he did, he introduced this poem with a dialect phrase, a dialect story, and it went like this. As Lapior Tom from Belangman did high, he saw Shalala shackets passing by, with jallow clothing Lapior's limbs were graced. Shalala petticoat had round his waist. Tom did rejoice, and as he walked along, sweet as a jay-pie, sung a Cornish song. And then he goes into this dialect one. Exactly. A jay-pie doesn't swing sweetly, doesn't sing sweetly. There's a reference to geese dancing here. It's spelt guys, and I pronounce it geese or guys, but traditionally it should be geese dancing. It comes from the old Cornish word geese for a jest or a prank or something. And people disguise themselves by cross-dressing, wearing veils, outlandish costume. Jallow clothing is bright and colourful. Petticoats refer to cross-dressing. Geese dancers processed through villages or streets and stopped every so often to engage in a piece of folk action, a mummers play, a wassail, or a dance, including step dances. A shalal was an infernal noise made with pots and pans, and they used to travel around to people who perhaps hadn't misbehaved themselves, visiting the wrong ladies or whatever, and would stand outside making this racket and waking everybody up. So that was a shalal. And as we just said, jay-pies don't sing sweetly, they screech. The Old Cornwall Society revived the Madron geese dances in the 1930s, and a report in the Cornishman in 1937 describes a Miss Phyllis Trevorrow who did the ancient broom dance, wore a costume which was nearly 150 years old. She learned the dance from her great-grandfather. And we'll have a little broom dance now, shall we?
dancers took full advantage of the satisfying sound of hard shoes on mining and quarrying industries, particularly noticeable in areas that have granites or slate, that there are a lot more dancers there. This sound is further helped by the metal plates on the bottom of the shoes. They were originally put there almost certainly to extend the life of shoes. And they are called scoots, hence the reason that step dancing is frequently called scoot dancing, although you also hear them called toes and cues. So you end up with a distinctive style of Cornish dancing, which is called scoot dancing. Now that scoot dancing is a duet between a musician and a dancer, and we have an absolutely lovely piece of tape for you now to hear just what that means.
We be here, we be there, we be working everywhere. We be working all the day, and the singing come what may. We be here, we be there, we be working everywhere. We be Cornish tailors. We be cacking with the geese while the public read a fleece. We be singing with the silk like the milk with the milk. We be covering up with feathers while we wearing out our leathers. We be Cornish tailors. We be here, we be there, we be working everywhere. We be working all the day and the singing come what may. We be here, there, we be everywhere. We be Cornish tailors. Tomany, tenany, berry renny, publi all. Berry renny, dress and jiftins, campering ag of all. Tomany, tenany, berry renny, publi all. Von Trahorian Colonel.
With grateful thanks to Richie and Jojo Jowdy, who performed that, and I don't know anyone else who could be that tight. The couple that you saw, who we didn't introduce, on the wall are Harry and Carrie. Not these ones, but the previous ones, who step danced in the streets around St Austell and St Blaise. We think he was almost certainly disabled because you never see him without a walking stick. And she step danced and carried little lavender bags to give to the ladies who gave her money, and she's my hero.
My grandfather left a notebook to the family. He was a Newquay man, came from Newquay, and in it he describes a troil, which is a kind of party combined dance that they used to have in the fish cellars, like this, in Newquay, after the filched season had finished, about October time in the year. And in his notebook, he leaves a little story about what he experienced as a youngster, what he remembers. It was a jolly evening arranged by the master sailor of each company. I remember one that I was taken to when I was 5 years of age. That would have been about 1885. It was held in the long room of Unity Cellars, these cellars. Mother and Ed played concertinas, and a man from Truro played fiddle. You need to know that my great-grandmother was a barmaid, right? So concertinas, this is what she did, party time. Mother and Ed played concertina, and a man from Truro played fiddle. There was dancing and general merriment. They were roasting herring on a gridiron, and they had competitions to see who could eat the most. That mind boggles. The mind really does boggle, doesn't it? Grandfather goes on. It was very amusing for me as a boy of 5, watching them dancing the lancers and many old dances, including the latterpooch, with nonsense words. Latterpooch, latterpooch, in an old shoe. I can dance latterpooch better than you. Latterpooch, latterpooch, in an old hat. I can dance latterpooch better than that. Fun was, said grandfather, when they all fell over trying to dance it. He was still able to do this dance in his 50s, and we were able to capture it on a mobile phone at Hotel Bristol a couple of years ago. I'll show you. These are 2 girls, much more athletic than I am. I could never do it.
Street dancing also featured at weddings, as Mr. Bottrell was writing. He wrote as the Old Celt in a newspaper in 1830. Presently, the fiddle struck up with a jig. "Let's have a double shuffle, Uncle William," said the young people. Up he jumped, as lively as a kid, though he was nearly 80, and footed it out to the delight of all. Young Jan followed, making the fire fly from the heels of his boots like flashes of lightning, and all the company were quickly whirling in reels without much order. It's worth saying that you often come across that description of flashing sparks, especially, as I was saying before, in areas where there's slate, because the irons on the bottom of old working boots were much more sharp, if you like, and as they hit the floor, they shot the sparks everywhere, and we have several records of people watching sparks fly. Dance competitions were popular, especially over public holidays and feast days, regattas, Royal Cornwall Gazette on Whit Monday in 1808. On a stage erected in Eluggan, 6 persons danced for a prize to the no little amusement of 2,900 spectators who came to bet and watch. Now, I don't think that was the first time they'd thought about that, do you? 2,900 spectators in Eluggan. You do well to get that audience there now. At the Padstow Athletics in 1883, Patrick Keefe gained first prize for step dancing, Abel French second, and J.P. Thomas was third. This is from the Royal Cornwall Gazette in 1883. And finally, midsummer celebrations in Falmouth in 1899. During the evening, the streets were crowded. The special attraction was a competition in step dance. That's from the Falmouth Packet. Clothing also added to the style of these dances. The hat that we saw in Lattapooch, where you dance around a hat and a shoe. Or in Cock in Breeches, which is a harvest dance, there's a special length of fabric let into the skirt of the girl who dances, so that as she turns, she can make that wing as she spins. Very impressive. We learnt this dance from a Mrs. Roos of Treesmill, somewhere near Tywardreath. I remember Jane doing this dance, even on my birthday. How much Jane's skirt swung, made of linsey, it's Lindsay Wolsey, and dravet in the summer, with an extra wing to make it swing. It swung like a seagull's wing. Isn't that lovely?
One of the things we're often asked about Cornish folk dancing is where did it go in the 1920s, what happened? And it's quite an interesting story, actually. In the 1920s, one lady, Mary Trefusis, who you will see here, promoted folk dancing in Cornwall. She organised festivals and also organised teaching in schools. She was trained herself by Cecil Sharp, who was the renowned folk dance and song collector. And he also controlled which dances were taught in the schools throughout the UK, effectively. Sharp visited Cornwall in 1913 and 14 and was hosted by a group of individuals who later became active members of the Old Cornwall movement, the same people who revived the Madram Guys dance. It's difficult to see how we didn't connect up with some of these dances we've seen. One can only assume that these dances didn't fit in with his idea of what folk dance was. One of his ideas was that step dancing was too influenced by musical tradition to be a real folk tradition. But as we've seen here, our step dancing goes back quite a long way before the musicals. To some extent, I think our friend Cecil Sharp was a fairly sort of prim person, and I think the, how can I describe it, fairly robust antics of the geese dancers and whatnot probably wasn't quite his scene. Either way, it resulted in the fact that Cornish step dancing traditions and the traditions associated with the guys dancing were not taught in Cornish schools, and they kind of disappeared from public view, except for some references in the newspapers. And but they still carried on, especially in North Cornwall, in some of the villages.
Gwen Masters, who comes from Blissland, was a historian. And she once told us that between the wars, they used to do their step dancing at home for private parties, but went to the village hall to do proper dancing, waltzes, whatever. But that she had learnt to do her step dancing at home in the dairy.
As I said, it was the Old Cornwall Society who actually captured many of these dance traditions. And there's some lovely references in the journal around the 1920s, 1930s. One here from Arthur Pascoe, St. Neot. But the best time of all was when Mr. Trevannin took down his old fiddle from the shelf, and away we all scampered in a three-handed reel, singing as well as dancing to music, though the words were foolish. Foolish words often come up when it comes to dancing and scoot dancing because they were mouth music, if you like, nonsense words, just to play the tune through. And in this case, it was, some say the devil's dead and buried in Voy Harbour. Some say he's alive again and apprenticed to a barber. When Tom's father died, Tom and I, we took a ride down by the riverside and back again for dinner. Three-handed reel. In the North Hill Old Cornwall Society Recorder's Notes, in 1931, they were describing a barn dance. And you can imagine it somewhere like this, but also having cattle down below, you know. There'd be dancing of all sorts going on. Heard told about one girl who was dancing on a rotten part of the barn floor, and it gave way. Vroom. One leg went through, and she found herself standing on the back of a cow, or standing underneath it. And you can just imagine that happening, can't you? Stamping around and going for the floorboards. I mustn't forget to mention the dance over the broomstick. When you hear the heavy boots beating a tattoo on the stone floor. As the dance proceeds, musicians play faster and faster. It's a marvel how these men, some big and well-built, can jump, some nimbly, as they do for this dance. The party goes on to well after midnight.
Even without a floor.
Actually, we did that once. We went through a floor, didn't we?
We went through the floor of the
Sainers.
Sainers pub
Yeah.
in Perranporth. They had to have it reinforced. They used to hold Cornish dances there regularly, and one night, I can't remember what we were dancing, but we both went through. Reports of step dancing in Boscastle continue in the papers during the early part of the 20th century. And Richard Dimbleby, no, not the Dimblebys you hear now, Richard, the father, Dimbleby, recorded the musicians with the sound of the dancers' feet in 1943 for the BBC. Charlie Bate, the renowned Padstow accordionist, also knew a version of the tune and remembered the dance performed by one Joe Apps.
Old Joe Apps used to come around with a banjo,
Yeah.
and you'd carry around the little 2-foot square dancing board, put the board down, and he'd do a little step dance. And the little tune that he used to step dance to, lots of titles for this tune. Chubb's Hornpipe, but up Boscastle they call it the Boscastle Breakdown. But down Patsel they call it the devil digging pennies in the middle of the night with origin. Oh, big holes. Let us see our lungs.
it's likely that Charlie Jones, who you just saw in the picture, was one of the dancers heard on the BBC recording. We were privileged to meet him in 1980, by which time he was quite elderly, but still keen to show us Boscastle Breakdown and talk about the step dancing in Boscastle. We have some videos of the step dancing in Boscastle.
We're live.
Oh, you're going to have some live ones of the step dancing in Boscastle. We were involved with a dance group called Cam Canuick, who were one of the very early revivals this time round, I suppose you could say. At the time, we were fortunate in having a gentleman called Arthur Biddick to coach us to do the scoot dancing. He was an accordionist, and he'd played for and taught step dance in Boscastle area, and could remember Richard Dimbleby's visit, interestingly enough. This provided a wonderful continuity right the way through Cornish scoot dancing tradition in the villages and farms of North Cornwall, and modern step dance displays. It was an interesting fact. People, particularly accordionists, often say that we dance way too fast. Not true. We could never persuade Arthur that we were going fast enough. He would stand on the side yelling at you, nowhere near fast enough, nowhere near. So I think
we've got 10 or so dancers now that we've collected.
Oh, you want me to go on from there? We have about 10 of the traditional step dances, as Merv says, such as three-hand reel, four-hand reel, the harvest dance that we saw, cock in breeches, Boscastle Breakdown, a broom dance, and not to be confused with a broomstick dance, which has somebody on each end of the broom. So I think that's harder, actually. Since then, dances have been written using the traditional steps to provide the 21st century scoot dancer with an amazing range of steps to choose from. Cornish scoot dancing regularly features in main stage displays at events such as now here's another mouthful, Festival Interceltique in Lorient in Brittany, which has audiences of thousands, said to be the largest Celtic festival in Europe.
And we'll leave you with a nice
And we
video
will
of
leave
them.
you with the Cornish